Well, it was really there was one particular article, but after a series of others that got me into jail, in which I was highly critical of the way the Chief Justice of Swaziland at the time was handling, the court system in Swaziland. I felt he was abusing the law and twisting the law to suit his interests. And I was merely calling him out on that. And eventually he took offense on a particular article in which he had denied someone legal representation in court. He had refused him access to a lawyer. And I think everybody knows that you can never do that to anyone who wants to be represented by a lawyer. And for calling him out on that, he took me to jail. And I had to go through a trial. There was a man who had been arrested, and when he got to court and the Chief Justice was presiding over the case, the man said, "I want legal representation." And the Chief Justice said, "No, you're not going to have legal representation." I then wrote an article and I said the Chief Justice does not have the power to deny anyone legal representation when he asks for one. And for that, he charged me with contempt of court.
So that we can see on a project-by-project basis what companies pay.
Just for contempt of court. And I eventually spent 15 months in prison. Because when we went on appeal on the case, I was acquitted on all charges. By the very people, the Director of Public Prosecutions who had prosecuted me, stood up on the appeal and said this was all a mistake.
US and UK authorities to deal with the allegations against Diazani and freeze these assets.
For Swaziland, the difference is in the monarchy itself. We are a country that is between Mozambique and South Africa, and we've watched them go through their own trials and tribulations. We believe that we did not get caught up in their problems because we had a monarchy. That is the narrative that goes through. And that if you don't have the monarchy, the country will disintegrate. So for the common Swazi, the king and the monarchy give a sense of security, whatever you might make of them. And they make people go on with their lives, secure in the knowledge that whatever problems that might arise, the king is there to take care of them. Because the understanding is the king only acts in the interests of the people. In terms of the definition, yes. Whether this particular king we have now does put the interests of the people first, that's debatable. It has been found that it's about his interests first and everybody else's. When we were still in prison, he got, I always think that he got cocky in the sense that he put us in prison on trumped up charges the judge who sentences us was not even qualified to be a judge. And I think he felt he could get away with anything, and he started making demands from government, financial demands. And other structures in the government system began to see that this man was not okay. And they tried to arrest him. He locked himself up in his official residence, not allowing anyone to come in, until the Lesotho government, where he came from, intervened and asked that he be deported so that to spare everybody the embarrassment of what was going on.
So he's no longer in Swaziland?
No, he's no longer in Swaziland. But I'm told that he's not even in Lesotho, because even in Lesotho they want to arrest him because he has his own problems. So he's stuck somewhere in South Africa. It's not an easy a process, but I think one of the first things you have to do when you get into a situation like that is to accept that this is where you are. And because if you are in denial, your mind won't cope. And it's very easy to go mad there. There's too much time to be thinking. And when you are a person with family and children, that can be problematic. Fortunately for me, I got a lot of support from, all over the international community, that I was able to concentrate on myself and my own survival without worrying too much about, family and kids and stuff like that. And while I waited for my sentence to end, I just concentrated on surviving inside jail.
Because there's only so much.
I mean, we are dealing here with a situation where, you are arrested in 2014, 2015 starts January 1. You are really now counting down the days, but you are worried. You're worried that given the way this whole thing has happened, what if on the days close to my release, they find new charges and try to keep me in jail? So that becomes a nightmare. That worries you as the day goes. But fortunately, about 2 months before I was to be released, the Chief Justice got into trouble when, like I said, he was to be arrested. In fact, that's when I knew that I was going to be released on the day when my sentence ended. I didn't think I would be released. But about a week before, I went on appeal in June, and understand that this was not a scheduled appeal in the normal, because appeals in Swaziland I had in May and in November. But here we are in June, and we are going to have my appeal case. And my lawyer came to me in jail and said, look, he's been told that they are going to release us. So, it was quite exciting, but I had to be patient to wait for the day when I was going to go to court. And fortunately, when we eventually got there, we never even argued our case on why we should be released, because the prosecution just simply raised its hands and said this was a terrible misunderstanding.
Clear about what we know, how we know it, and we stick very firmly to the facts in every case.
It was mainly from you've got in Swaziland, you've got the Times of Swaziland, which is the biggest newspaper. I mean, they as a group turned on me and supported my incarceration. They felt that I got what I deserved because I was disrespectful of the authorities. For whatever reason that was best known to them, they thought this was a narrative that should stand, and they were really aggressive, going to the point of even asking the US Embassy if they'd ever give me a visa to come to the US, because I was now a convicted criminal. They really wanted to see me dead and buried. Yes, they've since tried to make overtures to reconcile. I was happy that, I'm a Swazi. Unfortunately, not as adventurous as you Nigerians. But I was perhaps, I still think maybe I will live. But it's important for me that they understand that I'm not going to run away from them. I was vindicated, I did nothing wrong. And when the time comes, I will move on. That is unfortunately an ongoing issue. I have since realized that they are not going to give it to me on a silver platter. So in fact, before I even came here, I had been talking to my lawyer and the gentleman I was incarcerated with, that we need to push this case forward. Because we know that when we get to court, they won't have any defense. But I think they're just playing for time, looking at us whether we're really coming to... They are not saying we'll give you the money. They are saying come and fetch it. And I'm saying, let's go fetch it. What's wrong with that?
Switzerland, US, money that was stolen by the
It's actually still a mess. It hasn't healed. It hasn't healed, and I continue to write about that, about the wrongs that we see, and it's actually a total mess, to be quite honest.
The government has committed to do this, and it's absolutely urgent that we get through this legislation.
First of all, Swaziland social media space is wide open. It is there from Facebook to Twitter to Instagram, everything people use. There are no restrictions. I think one of the things to restrict social media is a very expensive exercise, and I know Swaziland cannot afford the luxury of funding a restriction. But I also think, secondly, the king has got a lot of children, anything from 3 years old to their 20s. And they are also into social media. So if he were to try and muzzle social media, he'd have to deal with his children first before he even... they also like to think of themselves as modern people. How does that fit with the media in Swaziland generally? The media in Swaziland sort of tends to take a safe line. A cautious, non-confrontational line. Swazis, I think they use, at social media level, use a lot of Facebook. But even there, you have patches of robust discussion, but the kind that would not be taken to mainstream media for discussion. They just start and end. In fact, one of the things that I've noted is that Swazis tend to use social media as the safe space to speak of issues that they would otherwise in other forums not say, in the belief that those who are in authority are not social media butterflies. So, yeah. I think that's the most difficult question you're asking me, because I tend to take the line of thinking that, when you look at Africa in its totality, my situation is not that serious. In Africa, journalists die, they disappear. They are sentenced to very long terms in prison. But I think what is important to answer you is, I think when you know your story and you can explain and you know that you were being truthful and that what you were doing was in the public interest, it's the only thing you really can have to take away in the face of the brutality of authority in African countries. At least your truth, looked at objectively, they can never take away, no matter how much they can be nasty and rough with you. And I'd say, in the end, that's what you can hold on to, and nobody can take it away from you.